Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining this webinar. I can see a number of people are just joining as we hit 10 o'clock, so welcome along. Hopefully more will join as we go as well, but very good to have you with us this morning. You're here, I hope, to hear about the Energy Systems Toolkit, which Wales and West Utilities have developed alongside Delta EE to support local area planning. And this morning we're going to be introducing the concepts around local area energy planning, the reasons we've developed this toolkit, how it links into our Pathfinder model and planning tool, and how hopefully we can work with you as local authorities, as other interested parties in the future of the energy system and in delivering net zero to create an energy system that works for everyone and supports the ambition that we all share to reach net zero. I'm Matt Hindle, Head of Net Zero and Sustainability at Wales and West Utilities. I'm going to be joined this morning on the as presenters by Neil Stubbold from Wales and West Utilities and Tessa Clark from Delta EE. We'll introduce both of them to you later. Apologies that we don't have cameras with the webinar this morning. Unfortunately, we've hit a few technical challenges, but hopefully you can all hear me clearly and you'll be able to see the content that we're presenting. We also very much want this to be an interactive session. You will see hopefully on the right hand side of the GoToWebinar platform, you've got the opportunity both to ask questions and participate in a chat, and you can select where your chat is going to. What I suggest is if you'd like to post messages for everyone who's online this morning, please use the chat. Feel free to react to what we're saying and contribute to a discussion there. If there are questions that you particularly like the panel to address, questions about the toolkit, the Pathfinder model, or Wales and West's ambitions in this space, please do put that in the questions box. We'll try to pick up as many of those as possible through the presentations, and at the end, if we run out of time, of course, we can always come back to you afterwards, and hopefully this morning will be a prompt for a lot of discussion, a lot of sort of future interaction, and we really welcome you both joining us and participating in that discussion. So first, let me introduce Wales and West Utilities. Many of you will probably know we're the gas distribution network for Wales and the southwest of England. So we keep the gas flowing through our pipes to a population of about 7.5 million people across those areas. That's a network of 35,000 kilometres of pipes, and we're investing £2 million every week in our programme to prepare that network for the future, and that means, of course, green gases. We've got 20 green gas sites connected to our network. That's enough to meet the annual demand of over 150,000 homes. And we've also seen 40 power stations, largely in the last 10 years or so, connecting to our network to help support renewable energy. So they tend to be the flexible generators that balance intermittent renewable production. And we'll be talking about how we see those interactions across the energy system a little bit today. We're investing to support a hydrogen-ready network, helping to decarbonise heat, power and transport, and that's a key cornerstone of our net zero strategy. So in terms of delivering net zero, on the next slide, we think there's a huge role for our network to play. Firstly, in terms of supporting the decarbonisation of some of the toughest challenges around industry and heat, working with industrial clusters, HyNet in North Wales and the South Wales Industrial Cluster to develop options for the energy system in those areas. Looking at net zero heating technologies for all of the communities that we serve, building on work that we've done around hybrid heating systems, looking at the future options with biomethane, hydrogen, smarter heating, and electrification. Looking at the role for hydrogen alongside biomethane in transport, so particularly working with a new group of organisations in the area around Bristol, Hydrogen Southwest, which is looking at the options for the aerospace industry, the shipping industry, wider transport, and the wider energy system across the Southwest. And looking to build on what we've been delivering through biomethane connections, so continuing to develop biomethane for communities across Wales and the southwest of England. All of that supported by our ambitions around using data, using digitalisation to support this transition. And what we see as we engage in that work and talk to partners across our area is a really growing interest in local area energy planning and the involvement of regional, devolved, local authorities and communities in shaping and supporting the transition of the energy system in their areas to support their ambition towards net zero and reducing emissions. The Energy System Catapult developed this idea of local area energy planning, really to emphasise the role that local areas can play in a data-driven whole energy system approach that identifies the most effective route for the local area to contribute to meeting the target. And one thing that we see there is that link between what local areas want to do and what their region, what the national energy system do, and those interactions are inherently complex. So what we're looking to do through the work that we're talking about today and through our involvement in local area planning in general is to help to demystify some of those interactions, to support local authorities, regional stakeholders, communities interested in the energy system to understand those interactions, the options available to them, and the way that they can use the data and information that we can provide to support those decision-making processes. We know that's becoming of greater interest locally from the interactions that we have with our communities, but we also see it's becoming a bigger part of the debate around the delivery of a net zero energy system nationally as well. Ofgem consulted earlier this year on the role of local energy institutions in decision making, and we expect that to be a bigger part of the debate, the conversation going forward, how the national regulator, how national policy takes into account the desires, the decisions of communities, of local representatives, and how that balances against the national picture is going to be an increasingly important part of the debate on how we reach net zero, especially when different technologies may play a different role in different areas, depending on local circumstances, depending on the availability of technologies like hydrogen, depending on the grid infrastructure, both gas and electricity in an area. Those decisions are going to be multi-layered and are going to need stronger understanding of those interactions between the local, the regional, and the national. So we want to recognise the value of the support that we can offer. We want to get a much stronger sense of and much better understanding of the ambitions, the desires, the opportunities of the communities that we serve. And we think that the data, the modelling capability, and the whole systems understanding that we can bring can really support that. And while this is really stepping up for us as an area of activity and interest, it's building on a lot of work that we've done to date. So contributing to the Energy Networks Association's Open Networks programme, which is a whole systems module and has focused on how energy networks can support local area planning, something we've been doing for some years. And we've also run projects like EPIC Energy Planning, integrated with councils, alongside Regen, Western Power Distribution, the distribution network that overlaps a significant part of our network, developing a process to use network analysis as part of a cost-benefit analysis approach to assess network impacts of local plans. So in a sense, none of this is new to us, but it's clearly becoming much more important and a much bigger part of our activity, as I hope I've laid out. So the development of the Energy System Toolkit came from engagement with our stakeholders, with local authorities, with regional interests around our business plan for the RIIO-2 price control period, which runs from 2021 to 2026. And that identified the need for us to work much more closely with a range of local organisations interested in the delivery of net zero. And tools of engagement established that to address that need, we first needed to understand the views of those organisations, those communities, much more clearly. And second, that there's a huge amount of complexity of detail in the information, in the options, and the data around the energy system, and that we need to support those organisations and communities in understanding the options for the system, understanding the interactions across the system. So the toolkit aims to address that need. So it's involved a lot of engagement with relevant organisations, and then a huge amount of information being pulled together, which should act as a resource for a range of organisations to use. And hopefully you'll see some of that as we go through the outputs of the project. But it also builds on our Pathfinder model, which Wales and West developed to bring understanding of energy system interactions and support both our own network planning and local area planning in general. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Neil Stubbold, who's a forecasting and network planning manager at Wales and West and has been heavily involved in the development of the Pathfinder model, to introduce that in a bit more detail and showcase how it can help support local planning and the assessment of options for net zero. Neil.
Thank you, Matt, and good morning all. So just to add a bit more background, I'm going to cover the Pathfinder model, which we've been developing over the last 7 or 8 years or so, and which forms a kind of central component of the Energy Systems Toolkit, although there's plenty of good material built around it as well. So what is Pathfinder? It's basically a whole system modelling tool, which is to be used for exploring future energy scenarios, covers the heat, transport and energy generation, so both power and green gases. So it covers those sectors. It was initially developed for the Cornwall Energy Island work. So it's basically used to calculate the kind of imbalance between supply and demand if Cornwall was to completely separate itself away from energy grids and be reliant on localised renewables and electrified heat. So it's really used just to calculate that imbalance to work out what the storage need would be. So that's where it all kind of sprang from, and it's grown ever since then. In the time since, it's been further developed by Delta E, who have streamlined the calculations and done a lot of work to improve the interface to make it more kind of user-friendly. And since then, Progressive Energy have also lent a lot of work looking at the costing elements, which have been built up in the last few years. And they also added quite a few inputs just to make it a more nuanced model and cover a few more bases. Next slide, please. So just to quickly, without diving into the full detail of the model, which is a bit of a beast to be honest, just to kind of cover a few of the main principles behind it. So one really important thing is that it's transparent. So it is really an Excel-based tool with no macros in it. So you can basically see all of the calculations and what they're doing. And there's no real programming knowledge needed to operate it. With the version that would be shared with the toolkit, we have tried to simplify it by taking some of those calculations out of it, but we're open to kind of discussing how that can be opened up and how users will be able to see a bit more of it. It's also flexible in terms of the geographical areas and the timescales that it can cover. So it was originally conceived of as a 2050 GB-wide model looking at net zero, but you can use it to kind of pick up intervals along the way, which we've done in some of the project work we've used it for. And it can be used for smaller geographies by kind of prorating number of households and populations and things like that. So you can use it for a few different use cases. It's also very much user-defined, and what I mean by that is that I guess there's two approaches with this sort of model. You can either have the user build their scenarios from the ground up and have a lot of input into it, or you can just have more of an optimization model, which you just define loose parameters and it kind of does a lot of the work for you. We've gone for the former, and there's pros and cons to both, but it does really give you ownership and kind of let you use it in a very sort of sandboxy way. And you can almost learn as much by sort of having an imbalanced scenario that doesn't quite work, and then kind of building from that rather than just being given the answer from the outset. There's also a lot of data that goes into the model, which is really important. A model's only as good as the assumption that goes into it. And that is based on real-world supply and demand profiles. At the moment, it uses data from 2018, so it covers the beast from the east, which gives us a view of a peak demand day, which I think is important to cover. It's very comprehensive in terms of the outputs that you get out of it. So the important thing is to cover the 3 points of the energy trilemma. So it does give you a view of the cost of your scenario per household. It lets you look at the any remaining emissions in your scenario, which you're trying to obviously eliminate. And that's broken down into a wide number of sectors. And it also gives you a view of the supply and demand imbalance. So whether your scenario would result in any blackouts, for example. So that's another way to kind of iteratively just improve what you're building up. Next slide, please. So just to quickly cover the sort of work that we've used it for, just to give an idea of the sort of case studies that we've done with it. So quite early on, Green City Vision was probably the first example of it being used to regionalise energy scenarios. So that looked at the Swindon area and the outlying rural locations, and just it was very much led by the local authority there, but we built a few scenarios just for comparison, just to look at how the costs compared really. And it's also been used in Gas Goes Green, which is a collaboration under the Energy Networks Association between gas networks, where we've basically used it to further the network's understanding of how they can actually decarbonise. And that's an example as well of where we've looked at intervals between now and 2050. So in that case, we've looked at the CCC's carbon budget to make sure that gas decarbonisation can keep pace with those targets. Then moving on to Zero 2050, so it wasn't really used there so much for scenario building. It was a huge project, Zero 2050. So Pathfinder basically took pieces of other work, packages, looking at individual areas of energy, and just pulled them all together, and just to make sure that the scenarios that we were building within that project did actually balance out correctly in the end. Moving on to Milford Haven Energy Kingdom, a really huge project which has as its main focus demonstrators for electrolysis, hydrogen refueling and hybrid heating. So there's a lot of good things being built out there. But in the background behind that, there was also a lot of good modelling work being done. Arup did the majority of that, looking at the near term and looking at the immediate area around Milford Haven. The Pathfinder was also used in that project to kind of look further afield to the whole of Pembrokeshire, and also to kind of look out to a further look out to 2050 and how you might reach net zero from those initial no regret steps that Arup were putting forward. And then moving on to the present day, so this is just a project that started off the Bristol City Leap work. So it's still really being scoped out, but we're looking forward to working with Amoresco there and building a few scenarios for Bristol to see how the city can decarbonise. So I think that brings us up to where we are now. So I'll hand over to Tessa Clark from Delta EE, who's going to talk a bit more about the Energy Systems Toolkit itself and how it was developed.
Thanks very much, Neil. Morning, everybody. My name is Tessa Clark. I'm Head of Consultancy Delivery here at Delta EE. For those of you that don't know us, we are a consultancy and research organisation, and we work across new energy. So we help organisations with the energy transition. So we've been working with Wales and West utilities, as well as other GDNs, network companies, and stakeholders across new energy. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit around the Energy Systems Toolkit in terms of the process we went through in terms of developing the toolkit, and then I'll walk you through actually what the toolkit looks like, give you a bit of a flavour of how it looks, how to use it, the contents, and then yeah, we're very happy to take questions afterwards. So firstly, I just wanted to talk you through some of the background as to how we developed the toolkit in the first place. So this was very much collaborative between ourselves and Wales and West utilities. So we wanted to create some resources that would be useful for local organisations around planning for net zero and reaching net zero. And in order to develop these toolkits, we really wanted to make sure that we engaged with local organisations as much as possible to make sure that this toolkit could be as useful as possible, and really, sort of fitted a need that was out there. So in order to do that, we started off with a range of interviews with the local authorities and community groups to really understand the kind of net zero planning process, what stage these organisations were at with net zero planning, really understand the context of what was behind those net zero plans, what was the process, what were maybe the challenges and the difficulties, and also what resources local authorities were using, because there are resources out there. So we wanted to make sure that we were creating something new. So with that in mind, we then scoped out the tool, looked at kind of what we already had, what would make sense to create for local authorities. So we created this toolkit. We carried out a peer review internally within Delta EE and Wales and West. And then once we'd created this toolkit, which I'll go through in a minute, it includes an Excel tool and some PowerPoint resources. Once we'd created the toolkit, we wanted to make sure that these would be useful, that they were fit for purpose, that they were relevant, that they made sense, they were easy to access. And we want to make sure that local authorities and other community organisations would be able to use them and would want to use them. So in order to do that, we carried out some user testing. So we very grateful for the organisations that helped us with this. We had a number of organisations from the Wales and West area who we sent them the toolkit, and then we had a sort of follow-up conversation once they'd had a chance to use it to collect their feedback. And we had some really, really great feedback from those users, overwhelmingly very positive about the toolkit, how easy it was to use, and its contents. But from the testing, we also got some suggestions for improvement in terms of additional guidance or things that could maybe little bits of additional functionality. So we implemented as much of that as we could. Finalised the toolkit, and then are now in a position to launch them, which is very, very exciting, and really looking forward to seeing them being used as widely as possible. So before I go on to talk about the toolkit itself, we've got a couple of slides here around kind of that initial bit of research we did to understand sort of where local authorities were with their net zero planning and the challenges that they're facing. I've got a couple of slides around that, and we'd be really interested actually to hear your thoughts today as to, we carried out this research, we actually begun it a couple of years ago, and things will absolutely have moved on a little bit since we initially started it. It'd be interesting to hear your, whether this still chimes with your experience, whether there are sort of further thoughts you might have. But certainly what we found was that different local authorities, when we interviewed local authorities, we did try to speak to different local authorities. So we had, for example, rural and urban local authorities, different large local authorities, some where there's only maybe one person who is leading the net zero planning. And what we found were that local authorities were at a different stage. So I think everybody we spoke to had made a net zero pledge, but in terms of that sort of action plan and the sort of detailed planning towards net zero, that was at very different stages within different local authorities. And some had a focus really on the sort of the council activity, so decarbonising council buildings and council domestic houses, and then others were looking more at the sort of the local area or both of those sort of areas. So we certainly found that there was no one size fits all, but there was generally a sort of similar path. It's by no means as simple as I'm making it look on this slide. There's a lot of sort of iterations going in here, a lot of other stages such as stakeholder engagement, baselining, collecting data, a lot of stages here that we sort of saw local authorities going through, but a sort of similar overall pathway. And then we also spoke to local authorities around trying to understand the process and really understand how that sort of planning was happening. So we spoke to local authorities about the drivers, so what was actually behind the net zero pledge, but also maybe other policies and plans that interlink with net zero. It certainly doesn't stand in isolation. We looked at who was involved in the net zero planning. We typically found that there was either an individual, a small number of individuals, or a team, such as sustainability, climate change officers, who are leading the plan, but actually a whole range of other stakeholders, internally and externally, involved in that. So quite typically, elected members, councillors might be involved sort of on a committee or boards in overseeing the net zero plan. As I said, it interlinks with other plans, economic development, for example. And then other local authorities, where there's sort of tiers of local authorities or other public bodies, regional, national, really quite complex picture. And it came through to us very strongly that this was different in every council, but actually there's a wide variety of stakeholders involved in planning. And while some of those, like your energy officer, is obviously going to have an energy background and going to have, some detailed knowledge, there will certainly be people involved in net zero planning who have no energy background. And this, net zero is a big topic. So there's a big steep learning curve for people who maybe don't have that background. And then we looked at the challenges that local authorities were facing. And the reason we wanted to look at this was obviously we wanted to see how we could support overcoming these challenges through the creation of resources. So there's a whole range of challenges there. I really appreciate it's not an easy job doing the net zero planning. And some of these obviously aren't things that we could overcome with the toolkit, like finance or resource. But I think the one that we really wanted to support is the last bullet on that slide there, around the complexity and challenges inherent in net zero. We can't make it simple, but we can at least provide some understanding to help understand what those complexities are, how there's interlinkages between power and heat and the sort of whole systems energy approach. And so that's really, I think, where the toolkit can support local authorities. So with all this in mind, we then scoped out the toolkit. We looked at kind of what is the problem that we're trying to address, which we really saw as sort of different local authorities being at different stages, lots of different stakeholders with different levels of knowledge, and then this sort of big complex problem of net zero. Also the sort of what Matt mentioned earlier around the interplay between local and regional and national, and how that sort of fits. So we thought about what we could create within this tool. We wanted it to be a useful starting point for net zero planning, but also useful for those local authorities who are a bit further on with their net zero planning, and to be useful for lots of different stakeholders, and importantly not duplicate resources that we already had available. But we have the Energy Pathfinder that Wales and West utilities already had, and we really wanted to build on that. And we thought, actually, this is a fantastic tool that we can really make accessible to a much broader audience. But alongside that, we wanted to create a sort of guidance and explanations, and really, I guess, simplify a lot of the, so there's so much around there around sort of net zero, so really sort of deepen that understanding of what options are out there for net zero. So a huge amount of work, as Matt mentioned earlier, and the result is this toolkit. So we've got 3 separate documents. So there's the Excel tool, the Pathfinder Lite tool, which is, as Neil was describing earlier. So this is a version of the Energy Pathfinder that we've called Pathfinder Lite, and that's because it is essentially a much simpler tool to use. It's the inputs and outputs I'll talk through later on but very accessible to use. As I said, we got really good feedback when we did user testing of just how easy it was to use this tool. Very easy to just pick up, doesn't take long, a few minutes, put some inputs in, you get results straight away. So really great tool to kind of play around with net zero options. And then there's 2 PowerPoints. So there's one PowerPoint, the Pathfinder Lite tool guidance document, that's really accompanying the Excel tool. And that is step-by-step guidance of how to use the tool. It talks you through in really sort of simple steps, where you need to put into inputs into the Excel tool, and helps you understand what the results are. And then finally, the Net Zero Energy Knowledge Base document. I'll talk you through this in a minute as well. This is a PowerPoint or a PDF you'd receive it as. And this is really a sort of a reference document where it's actually quite a long document. I did wonder at some point, is this too long? But again, the feedback we got from users was actually it was really useful, because there's lots of different sections within this PDF. It's not meant to be read it from page 1 to the end. It's meant to be dip in and out of different sections. There'll be some sections which might be more relevant or useful for you, and it's really there to provide some guidance, some explanations to accompany net zero planning, and can be very much used in conjunction with the tool as well. So I'm just going to show you some screenshots of what the tool looks like. So I'll start with the Pathfinder Lite tool, so the Excel document. I'll just talk you through a little bit how to use it, and you can get a little feel for it. So it's an Excel tool, as we said. So when you open it up, it looks like this. This is just the cover page, where it's just got a little bit of background about the tool, how to use it, how it works. And then when you click on the second tab, which is called Local Area Inputs and Outputs, this is what it looks like. So it's just one tab that you have to use. It's really, really simple to use. And what we've tried to do is provide as much guidance as possible to again make it easy to use. So essentially, the sort of pale yellow boxes are ones where you, as the user, would change or enter information. The dark yellow, you can see, are the kind of units. And all of the inputs you put at the top of the page, you then click F9 and it spits out your results for you. And there's sort of on this right, there's a blue text, which is guidance and explanations. So we've said there what you need to enter onto each line. And we've also provided hyperlinks where, if there's data that you need to get, we've provided some hyperlinks where, you can get that information on your area. But overall, as you can see on this page, the way that this tool is meant to be used is, you can see you've got two columns there. You've got one that says baseline and one that says future scenario. So the idea is the baseline is today, and you can use that baseline. Obviously, this is intended for a local audience, so you could do this for your local authority area, but it works at any scale, so you could do that at any scale you want. But essentially, you put in the data for the baseline situation, and then the future scenario is where you get to have lots of fun and play around with different scenarios. And you can do that, you could do a 2050 scenario, you could do a 2030 scenario, whatever you're sort of planning for. And this is where you get to put in information, and then you can sort of adjust it and see how different scenarios would look in the results. So to talk you through the sorts of things that you'd have to put in. So in the inputs page, we've got energy demand and we've got energy supply. So on the energy demand part, you can see we've got energy efficiency, domestic heat, and we've got transport, both domestic and commercial. So for example, under domestic heat, for example, you can see here we've listed all the main types of heating fuels that you could energy sources that you could use to be heating domestic properties. So you could play around in this scenario. You'd be able to find out what the baseline is for your area, but for a future scenario, you could play around with, how many heat pumps do you think, or what proportion of heat pumps are there going to be in your local area versus mains gas versus hybrids versus biomass, and you can adjust those percentages and see how that looks. The same for transport. You can play around between, the percentage of vehicles in your area that you think will be petrol or diesel versus electric or gas vehicles. And then after you've done the energy demand, there's the energy supply section. So this looks at electricity supply. There's a bit there you can see on carbon capture and storage. There's actually a few more rows that aren't shown on this page for gas and for hydrogen. This is, I suppose, slightly complex in that obviously electricity supply, for example, you can see we've split it in national assets and local assets below. So obviously, you know, we aren't a small island in our local areas. So this is really sort of showing the interplay between the local and the national scale. So what we've done here is actually enter some default values for the national picture. So yeah, you can see sort of nuclear, wind, coal. We've put in some default values for baseline and for 2050. This is because obviously in your local area you might not have a nuclear power station, but the grid in your area will obviously be will have that national mix. So you can leave the default values as they are if you want. You can change them if you want to play around with things, but you can certainly, under the local assets, you can play around with, for example, adding in more wind farms, solar farms, gas, whatever you want to sort of play around with on that. You can play around with having some carbon capture and storage and see how that impacts. So once you put in your demand, once you put in your supply, you press F9, the magic key, and that gives you your results. So that essentially does all the calculations behind the scenes and sort of spits out the results. And every time you change the inputs, you just press that and it will update these results. And so what the results show you, so for each kind of bit, you've got a table and you've got a chart with the results for the baseline, so showing you what it is currently, and then what it would be in the future scenario. So here you can see these are the carbon emissions for the local area, and you can see how in this scenario carbon emissions sort of, well, not quite halved, but they reduced quite a lot between the baseline and the future scenario, and you can see how they're made up. You get the same results for energy consumption and for household energy bills. So it's really useful to see, okay, if we change this demand, change the supply, how is that going to impact the end consumer, which is obviously really important. And then the other thing that the results gives you is also, this is the example of electricity, but there's also a similar one for gas. And this is really interesting because if we just look at the charts for a minute, you can see where the electricity supply is coming from throughout the year and for different months. So you can see the seasonal differences between electricity supply and also demand. So demand is the black line, and then the charts for the different energy sources. So this is really useful, just as a kind of quick graphical. You can sort of see, okay, I can see the difference between winter and summer on both demand and supply, but it also allows you to see whether demand and supply are matching, which is obviously what we need to do. So if you had a scenario where, for example, you'd electrified all your heat, electrified all your transport, but you had an increased electricity supply, you would see in that example that you'd really have a shortage of electricity supply and what we've called hours of blackout, just essentially not enough electricity. So that's again really useful, and you can play around with different energy supply sources. So that's a sort of a quick tour of the Excel tool. As I think I've hopefully made quite clear there, the intention really is for you to be able to play around with different scenarios and understand the impact. And the feedback we got from users was it was very accessible and very easy to go and try those things out. So the guidance document, this is a short PowerPoint or PDF document that you get alongside the tool, and that really talks you through some of the things that I've just talked through. And this is because we just wanted to make sure that the tool could be used quite easily, and that also people would interpret the results as they were intended. So it takes you step by step how to use the tool. It explains a bit how the tool works. So these are kind of like the calculations sort of behind the model that you don't see. You don't need to understand this if you don't want to, but I know some people are very interested in this, and that's all there for you to, as Neil said, we wanted this to be transparent, so it's all very clear why that happens. And then lastly, it also helps you, there's some guidance on how to understand the results so that, yeah, you can interpret those and make the most of the results that are there. So that's just a guidance document that comes alongside the Excel tool. And then lastly, the third part of the Energy Systems Toolkit is this knowledge-based document. So as I said before, this is a PDF document, and it's got several chunks or sections in it that you can sort of dip in and out. We did think, you know, going back to the beginning when we looked at sort of the needs of local authorities and local organisations, there might be different stakeholders who maybe based on their background or based on the, you know, the bit of net zero planning that they're involved with, there might be sections or, you know, a couple of pages of this that would be really useful to them. So it's meant to be quite flexible in how it's used. So there's some sections there in terms of providing an overview of how the UK energy system works. So kind of where energy comes from, some diagrams around some networks, things like that. We really wanted to make sure the toolkit was engaging as possible. So we've made use of a lot of diagrams, and hopefully it's not sort of text heavy. We really wanted this to be sort of digestible information. We've got some information there around net zero and also whole energy systems. So why sort of whole energy system thinking is important when looking at net zero, how the sort of local and national feeds in. So we look at this sort of quite broad looking across the energy system. Some information here around excuse me, around consumer bills, so kind of understanding, you know, where the network charges come within a consumer bill and how, you know, how energy supply ultimately does impact other users within the energy system. We've then got a section looking at different sort of technologies. So it covers power, heat and transport, and what we've done is provide 1 or 2 slides on all the sort of key technologies or energy sources that are relevant. So we've sort of got hydrogen and V2G as examples here. This is kind of, you know, if you've never heard of V2G, this would be a great slide to read because it gives you an understanding of what the technology is, how suitable it might be for different areas or different considerations. So, you know, if you're in a rural area or, you know, an urban area or things like that, and a bit of an understanding of, you know, what's the outlook for this technology in the next 10 years, 30 years. And then we've got some case studies in there. So really grateful again for the local authorities and community groups who helped us with the case studies. We thought it'd be really inspiring and helpful to see what other local authorities are doing with their net zero planning. We've provided a glossary because we know how acronym heavy and terminology heavy this sector can be. So again, a really useful resource for anybody sort of new into, or maybe not necessarily even new into it, but new to some parts of it. And then we've also provided links to other resources because we know there are other resources out there that are complementary to this. But yeah, we wanted to point people in the direction of those as well. So that's sort of overview of those 3 documents. Yeah, and I really hope that those will be useful for anybody who decides to use them. I will pass back over to Neil or to Matt for the last section.
Thank you very much, Tessa, and thank you to Neil beforehand as well. So hopefully that's given you a good overview of some of the functionality of the Pathfinder and some of the detail and information that you can find in the Energy System Toolkit. We've picked up a couple of questions as we've gone in the Q&A. Please do post anything there that you'd like the panel to pick up in the 15 minutes or so that we have remaining. But one of the first questions was, how do we get a copy of the Pathfinder tool? And for this, for the tool and for the toolkit, we very much want this to be a shareable and usable resource. So first of all, you can get in touch with the team at Wales & West on the email address at the top there, netzero@wwutilities.co.uk. There are no restrictions whatsoever on sharing the toolkit. It's It's there to be used. Welcome inquiries from any type of organisation who would like to use it. For the Pathfinder tool itself, there is a license associated with that, which is just around ensuring it's used as it's intended. But that should be relatively simple, relatively easy for particularly devolved regional local authorities to sign up to and to use. And as Neil emphasised as he was introducing Pathfinder, it very much aims to be transparent, flexible, to allow users to define what they want to get out of it. So it should be something that is very useful for a range of organisations. So please do get in contact with the team if you're interested in using it, if you're interested in talking to us more about the functionality of it and how it might work for your projects. We've picked up a couple of questions in the chat around the incorporation of hydrogen, so how that's handled in the model, and the way in which the emission savings are displayed as well. I can see also a question around energy efficiency model, energy efficiency measures, which are effectively something that the model can take into a place as an input. So you can input how you would or what interventions you expect around energy efficiency and see the impact that those have. And there's also a question there from Hugh around the time-based results and also the data sources. So in terms of the data and the way the data is displayed, the tool aims to be transparent around the sources it's used, and also from an input perspective allows a lot of user definition around those sources. So there's a lot of flexibility there, but it should also be very transparent in terms of how it displays that information. Neil, would you like to add anything to those questions around the data and the display of data?
Yeah, just to pick them up kind of one by one. So I guess on the energy efficiency side of things, so as you say, it's just kind of applied as a kind of broad brush demand reduction percentage, but there is a cost associated with that that's drawn from an element energy study, which was looking at the cost of individual measures and the amount of emissions that they'd abate, or the percentage by which they bring down demand. On the time-based side of things, that's really going to be a user-defined thing. So where we've done the work for Gas Goes Green, looking at those intervals based on the carbon budget, it's really a matter of kind of deciding in your inputs how far you think you might have got with, say, heat pumps or with hydrogen production by whatever year you're trying to model. So you don't really just ask the model to look at a year. You've got to kind of define that time scale yourself, I guess. Just on the hydrogen side of things, I tried to pick that up in the questions box, but yeah, I guess we're breaking things down into green and blue hydrogen as well, and on the green hydrogen side of things, we're separating out what comes from dedicated renewables and what comes from constrained renewables, which would produce hydrogen when there's no demand on the electricity grid.
Great, and I think that answer has also picked up the later question around hydrogen being available as a domestic heat option and the sources of it. Tessa, would you like to add anything on any of those questions around the inputs and the way in which the information about different technologies is displayed?
I think only to really say that obviously the toolkit that we're presenting today is the the Lite version. So as I explained, we wanted to make this accessible. So in order to do that, we have, simplified things because we wanted to make sure it was quick and easy to use. But the full Pathfinder tool, might address some of these questions as well. And that's very much the kind of, because of the aims of it. Hopefully, once people use the tool, you can see that the results are there at the bottom. And I think the way that we've displayed it is, I think, hopefully, really, really easy to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the game, and we're always open to conversations as well about the use of the full Pathfinder model, as well as the Lite version that this presentation has focused on. We've had some questions around the councils using the tools, so we gave a couple of examples around Milford Haven Energy Kingdom work, which Pembrokeshire County Council were very heavily involved in. The tool's been used in the Bristol City Leap project. So Amoresco, who are the main consultancy delivering the Bristol City Leap, are using the tool to help inform and support decision making there. We've also used it in a range of other discussions with local authorities in South Wales and the South West. So short answer is yes, but we're very keen for it to do more. There's a good question from Hugh about impacts and opportunities linked to wider drivers. For poverty, clearly a particularly important issue at the moment and going into this winter, and job skills opportunities. We don't explicitly bring out some of those sort of impacts through the tool at the moment, although the costings in the tool will help potentially inform some discussion or commentary around similar issues. But that it would be a further development to get sort of specific outputs in those areas. The keeping the knowledge base up to date, clearly it will be a massive task to continually update the knowledge base. We will certainly keep as much as we can up to date, but given the scale of the information, given the scale of the project, we would probably need we'll probably need further iterations in the future to keep it fully up to date. So would you like to come in on the sort of costings in Pathfinder and how those are sort of structured in the model?
That might be a better one for Neil to address, I'm afraid.
Neil, would you like to pick that up?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way it assesses costs is it develops a levelized cost of energy based on how the scenario is made up of different technologies. So that is going to be constantly in flux based on the inputs you're putting into the model. But the costs at the moment are just expressed as a kind of household cost, which is broken down into both the bills that you'd end up paying for your energy and also kind of household fabric costs or technology costs. So what you'd be spending on the heating technology itself. So that's how things look at the moment. Happy to hear suggestions on different ways of approaching that, but at the moment that's how it covers cost.
Thanks, Neil. And we've also had a question around defining spatial areas for the tool. And yes, Nigel, simple answer: the tool can be used to address a specific area, a district within a city, not necessarily just a city or a wider local authority area. So we've used it, for example, in looking at sort of business park scale development and assessing the interactions and the impacts of different measures there. So absolutely, you can define a smaller spatial area if needed. And Debbie's asked a question around all types of hydrogen production, alternative types of hydrogen production. yes, that is a likely sort of further build of the certainly of the main Pathfinder model to make sure that we're covering all potential types of hydrogen production, and the key thing there in terms of the model will probably be the production profiles that covers. Tessa, was there anything else you wanted to pick out, or any kind of closing remarks you wanted to make from Delta's perspective?
I don't think so. I think just to make the sort of broad points, having worked with yourselves on this, that you know, that there were some suggestions that came back from user testing, and I can see within these questions here around, for example, district heating. You know, there are further developments that I'm sure that you'll be looking to make over the next few years, and it's, you know, the energy system is constantly changing, so I think it will be an ever improving tool. And it's really great to see people's questions, and just really encourage everyone to use it, and I think get in touch with you if there are further questions.
Absolutely, and a huge thanks to you and the Delta team for all the work that's gone into developing this and in presenting it to the audience today. Neil, anything final you wanted to draw out, or any final comments from you?
I think just to add to what Tessa said, the energy system is constantly changing. There's a lot of assumptions going into this model that we do need to kind of do our best to keep up to speed with. So I think that's going to be very important to us. But just really keen to see how people take this toolkit on and use it. For some people, it may be the model side of it that's really important for them. For others, it might just be the kind of base knowledge that it offers up as well. So really keen to see people using it and support along the way. Also, just want to take a moment just to thank the organisations that did help out with testing the toolkit. Their input is really important. It's absolutely key that this is a stakeholder-led piece of work.
Absolutely, and I think some have joined us this morning, so thank you very much for all of the input and for being with us today. We really do appreciate that, and as Neil says, it will be a constant task to keep this up to date with our very fast changing energy system. So we really welcome ongoing input and also opportunities to work together, and hopefully to use this tool as a key part of developing an energy system that really works for the communities we serve and the communities around the UK. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm sorry if we didn't pick up every question that was asked in the chat. Please do follow up with us with the contact details there. Very happy to do that. I hope this has been a useful introduction to the toolkit and to the Pathfinder tool for those who were new to it, and it will act as a prompt for future projects, future discussions, and work that we can do together. So thank you very much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.